Welcome to a new podcast episode of Nina's Apothecary. I'm so glad you're back. Whether you're listening again or watching, I always appreciate it so much. Thank you also for the really great feedback. Today is also the first podcast episode after my premiere at the O3 Podcast Award. I am so grateful and still can't believe that all of you voted for me. Now, of course, I'm even more ambitious for next year. And as you can see, I've already made some changes. Please let me know how you find it now. Today's topic is something that probably affects a very, very large number of people. I hear this a lot in the pharmacy, and it's also a big topic among friends, acquaintances, and family. It's about histamine. We all know it. I have histamine. I had a histamine attack. But what does that actually mean? Let's dive right in, as this is one of the intolerances that actually isn't one. But for that reason, I'd like to tell you what histamine actually is. Histamine is a neurotransmitter, something important that we always have to have in our body and need. It is primarily responsible for the immune system, our sleep-wake cycle, and also for our memory performance, our learning performance, but unfortunately also for inflammatory reactions. And we probably know it mostly from the negative part of the neurotransmitter. Chemically, it is an amine, a breakdown product of a protein. And there are so-called exogenous histamines, which we all know. It is mostly associated with long-aged cheese and red wine. Then there are also histamines, for example, in pineapples, which then cause the release of histamine in our intestine. What exactly is histamine intolerance? It's a problem of the body not being able to handle this amount of histamine. Well, whether it be large amounts or even small amounts. Mostly because either the enzyme responsible for it, DAO, diamine oxidase, is not functioning sufficiently or is not sufficiently present in the body. And this can lead to either mild problems or to very serious problems. The most common symptoms of histamine intolerance are usually skin rashes, digestive problems. Many also know this histamine flush, which is just becoming suddenly very red, but it can also lead to headaches, dizziness, or respiratory problems. So, you see, it's quite a wide range of different symptoms that can be assigned to many different diseases, intolerances, allergies, and all sorts of things, which means the diagnosis is probably quite complicated. What I always advise, as you've also heard in the last episodes where we talked about other intolerances, is to keep a food diary, because it's super important. And I know from experience, you always think, oh, I'll remember what I ate and when I felt worse or what symptom I had. But unfortunately, it's not the case because we obviously have 1,000 other things to think about. So really write it down briefly, what you ate, or take a photo, and then write down whether you had complaints or not. If so, what they were. Now, those of you who are already struggling with histamine intolerance might be wondering, why do I have this at all? Good question, and the answer is not so simple and not so clear. The first thing we know is that the enzyme activity of DAO may not function sufficiently, or the enzyme may not be sufficiently present. That can be one reason. Then, there may be some gastrointestinal problems, any stomach intestinal issues, because, as I mentioned briefly, it is often split in the intestine. This can also be an indication, or medications can influence it. For example, various painkillers or antidepressants, or the excessive consumption of certain very histamine-rich foods can of course lead to the body eventually saying, this is too much for me. I can't anymore. I don't have that much enzyme activity. It's also possible that you simply have too little of the enzyme, either due to genetics or acquired factors, where external influences cause the body to say, no, I can't produce so much of the enzyme, and these can be of very different natures. How can I determine if I have histamine intolerance or not? Okay, I've briefly mentioned keeping a food diary, which most will find a bit tedious, but I assure you, it's certainly the most pleasant method. There's also a blood test available that can measure the enzyme activity of the enzyme that breaks down histamine. However, there's no direct correlation between enzyme activity and histamine intolerance. You can somewhat deduce it, but it doesn't provide 100% certainty. Then there's the provocation test, where, under the supervision of a doctor, histamine is administered to you, and then it's observed what happens. So, if you really are histamine intolerant, it's going to be quite uncomfortable, I would say. Another simple method, which could be part of the food diary, is an elimination diet. This can also be done if you believe you have lactose or fructose intolerance. Simply eliminate histamine for 1 or 2 weeks, eliminate lactose for a week or two, and then see if you have fewer, more, or different symptoms. So this is probably the easiest in addition to keeping a food diary in terms of daily implementation. Which foods are histamine rich? Most of us probably know them already. There's the strongly aged cheese, alcohol, especially red wine, or long-aged matured alcohol. Then there are long-stored matured sausages, fermented products like sauerkraut, and we also have tuna, mackerels, anything that's heavily processed, so stored in cans or the like, and vinegar-based foods can also be included. Then, in contrast to histamine-containing foods, there are also foods that cause histamine release. These include strawberries, tomatoes, avocados. Then we have various spices like cinnamon, tonka beans, nuts, and also things like cocoa, for example, belong to this category. So, as you might hear in any other podcast from me or also on Instagram, Aninamilenk, by the way, or TikTok, a Frau Apotheker, you'll probably get the same advice from me. Fresh foods are simply the key to almost everything in our lives. Cooking fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, except the previously mentioned ones, of course. Fresh herbs, drinking water, herbal teas. It makes a huge difference. So you can remember it this way. The longer something is stored, the more histamine it contains. Now, I always hear in the pharmacy or when you write to me that it's not the same every day. Sometimes I tolerate it well, sometimes not at all, and I don't understand why. True, it seems illogical, but also totally logical because, like everything in the body, everything should be seen as a unit and considered holistically. This means our enzyme activity, whether it's the enzyme that breaks down fructose, lactose, or histamine, depends on many different factors, such as stress, for example. How can we look at reducing our stress? You'll probably hear this in every podcast episode from me, that we reduce our stress a bit. First, through high quality and especially sufficient sleep. I always recommend a free sleep app. Feel free to write to me if you want to know which one. As I said, just something I found at some point, so no ads, nothing like that. Then relaxation techniques like breathing exercises, muscle relaxations, yoga, movement, sports, going out into fresh air, just taking a breath. So there are really many different things to reduce stress, including the right supplements. That was the first thing you can do about histamine intolerance, because when we constantly stress our bodies, our enzymes are more like shocked and say, well, I don't want this. You can imagine it that way. Therefore, stress management and reduction are, of course, very important. Another extremely important thing is conscious eating. The less aware we are of what we're doing, what we're eating, why we're eating it, and what it might contain, the more difficult it will obviously be for us to deal with histamine intolerance. Like with all intolerances and allergies, it's extremely important not to continuously expose ourselves to this neurotransmitter, this allergen, or whatever it may be, meaning we should try not to consume it. It won't always be possible, but just ensure that it's not consumed constantly. So, conscious eating is my second tip against histamine intolerance. My third tip against histamine intolerance is to plan your meals. If I know I have to take something to work, or I'd like to snack on something, preparing it in advance without the previously mentioned items makes it much easier, because then you don't end up in a situation where you're wondering what to eat, you're really hungry, and then you have to buy something available which might not be suitable. So planning is extremely important. What I can also tell you, fourthly, is to always carry a small emergency kit, because we all know we can't always bring and eat our own food, which would also look a bit strange. So, a small emergency kit with, for example, an antihistamine, or please talk to your doctor if it's very severe. Some might need cortisone therapy. There are also effervescent tablets, for instance, that you can always carry with you. And it's also very small, probably calming as well when you think, okay, now I'm eating out. I'm doing everything with the best of knowledge and belief, but you never know. Then, fifth, if you're going to a restaurant, maybe mention it when making a reservation, or read through the menu in advance so you can think at home about what you can eat and what might not be so smart. Nowadays, it's relatively easy, I would say not everywhere, but almost everywhere, that when you tell the staff, look, I have histamine intolerance, they already know exactly what suits you or what doesn't, or maybe they'll prepare something special. So communication is key again here. And my next tip is always about the basic things we can do for our lives, which involve movement, drinking water, nutrition, and the better we take care of ourselves, the more we sleep, the better and more grateful our body is for it, maybe producing more enzymes, and then perhaps you might tolerate it better sometimes. So that's always the foundation for everything. And of course, we can't always eat so many healthy things that we have enough nutrients and supplements in our body. So I can recommend, for those who are familiar, there's this drawing of a cell with a cell membrane, and histamine is mostly located in this cell membrane. If it's not tightly sealed, we're always at risk of histamine escaping from this membrane and swirling freely in the body, causing skin reactions, gastrointestinal problems, respiratory issues, etc. So, my secret tip is a root called astragalus, which helps keep the cell walls stable. Please note, this isn't something we can take as an emergency measure, but rather something I take in the long term. Also for people with allergies, as histamine is also involved in pollen allergies, for example. It's best to start in March or even February to keep your cell walls stable, strengthen the immune system. So the immune system is a big topic here too, including vitamin D, C, zinc, just making sure the stores are full. Then I have my second secret tip for when we say, I'm going out to eat, I'm invited, I have a date, a work meal, whatever. I just want to switch off my mind and enjoy. There's also something for that. Indeed, you can also take this enzyme. Really cool. I recommend it because the great thing is, it's an enzyme that we already have in our body. Just with histamine intolerance, you have a bit less of it, and then you can take the enzyme called DAO, and there's a product called Dowsin for this. You take it with the first bite or just before, a minute, 5 minutes beforehand, and then you can just relax. How pleasant is that? And how cool is this invention? Many, many thanks to the company. I think it's simply amazing, especially since it's the only product, at least to my knowledge, that does something like this. And it really makes life easier for many. I always get really cool messages from you too, because sometimes we just need to enjoy. That's exactly my creed, saying, okay, if we look after our body 80% of the time, our nutrition, our exercise, we also need the balance of the 20%, where we just do and act as we please. This is also necessary for our psyche, and we still don't want to suffer, so it's a really cool invention. So all that's left for me to say is thank you. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you'd like to share your histamine journey or experiences with me, feel free to write to me on Instagram, TikTok, on my website, karish.at, or come by the pharmacy, or talk to me if you see me on the street. I often hear, I saw you there. I didn't dare to say anything. Please always come to me. I'm extremely happy, or even in Rome or wherever you see me. Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and cherish yourself.